Welcome into the Built on Air podcast. We are in season 25, episode 6. Good to be with you. Good to be back post acquisition discussion. A week to digest it. I think I was mentioning before the show that everybody kind of got their feelings out and initial thoughts. I was reading a lot of comments online in all the communities, LinkedIn, Reddit, and Built on Air community and Facebook, and everybody has a wide variety of opinions. And now that I think that's settled down, everybody's kind of like, all right, back to work. Let's see how this all shakes out. But yeah, so we're gonna dive into a couple of new features and go through that. Before we do, there are a couple. I'm gonna share my screen. There are a couple things I'm gonna highlight. And we'll go through that. I get the right one. Let's go back here. All right. So in the what's new, they did release a couple new features, both of them related. So nest tasks inside tasks on the timeline. So nested tasks, if you had nested tasks on a timeline view, you weren't seeing them. So they've added that functionality. You can now nest tasks inside other tasks up to 7 layers deep in timeline view. Collapse or expand to enable. Use the Gantt layout and toggle on enable nested records.
I take issue with describing this as nest tasks inside tasks, because it's like they're records. Like they could be any. They're not necessarily tasks. In this example, they're tasks.
Yeah.
But what they're talking about is the ability to nest records within themselves if you have a self-linking table. So in this example, it's tasks and subtasks that are linked to one another. Kind of like you can in the list view, which, if I'm not mistaken, isn't there? Can you only do that in the data layer, or can you do that in interfaces now too? The nesting.
You can nest if you go to the layers and if you links to itself, then there's a button that says, you can have nested.
I think at one point it was that feature was only like when they increased it to 7, the nested layers, like it only worked on one or the other. I can't remember, but now I think it's on both. Either way, this is very helpful if you're using self-linked, self-referencing tables. Super useful. And now with the reciprocal field added, it's even easier to manage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll share a little bit. We'll talk about this one. It's kind of related. New scheduling controls for date dependencies. So for timelines to work, you need to have date dependencies in the timeline. And so now you can set, it used to be you had to go to every single record and specify what like the buffer is and what the relationship is, right? Now you can set defaults at the table level of what the default buffer and default dependency type is, which makes sense because you're usually, I'm sure there's a use case where you'd want different types. So basically it's like how the relationship between records, if you want to go from when one task, assuming you're using one task ends to the next one starting, and if you want like a day buffer in between those tasks, or if you want them to override and use start to start. So there's different ways you can do it. In the past, actually you can still set record level differences. So on a per record level, you can have differences, but I think most of the time you're using this, you want the same structure for the entire table. So now you can set the default at the table level and it will be there for all of them. You don't have to change it.
I think this is fine for everything except for buffer. I think buffer should be treated the same way as anchor, which is or what is it, predecessor, which is determined by a field. So for the use case that we build, things that we kind of engineered our own date dependencies based off of, we have a field, usually we call it offset, but it's the same concept as buffer, where it's -7 or +14 or whatever, and having to click into the UI to open the sub window to put that in record by record is like impossible. So to me, I think it would be a better implementation if buffer was just a field in the same way that some of the other ones are.
Yeah. Like how on the timeline you can point the timeline at a particular field for someone's availability if you're doing the utilization. Like you should be able to do the same thing for this. I agree.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have a little bit of inside knowledge on these two things. I don't know. She went public with it on LinkedIn. I'll give a shout out to Jenny, who was instrumental in getting this implemented. A lot of other project management tools like Microsoft Project and others have this functionality. And so if you're coming from a legacy tool into Airtable, it was quite surprising that this functionality didn't exist. And so with a lot of concerted effort and discussion with Airtable, I was a small part in those discussions, but was able to kind of see this come to fruition and actually get implemented within Airtable. So that was kind of cool to see and satisfied a specific use case that I think is common to anybody using kind of this timeline date dependency functionality.
Well, that's awesome. The community thanks you for advocating for it.
Yeah. So that was cool. All right, a couple other things before we jump in. If you follow on Reddit, the Reddit Airtable subreddit, I don't know, like 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, Airtable as an entity kind of took ownership of it. I think they always were the moderators, but they never really like had a presence there. Now you can tell that they're leveraging this subreddit as a channel for corporate. They're doing a lot more AMAs with employees. This one is tomorrow with Lindsay, senior manager, Airtable for Airtable. So basically the internal builder for tools within the company. And it'll be interesting. Nobody's asked questions about the acquisition out there, so I don't know if we need to post like, okay, what's going on. So anyways, we'll see if they respond to any of that. But there's that AMA tomorrow. Put your questions up there before then, and I'll answer them. And the other thing going on, summer camp. I think Camille, you've got opinions on naming here, but Airtable this week is running Airtable Summer Camp. So it actually starts right after our podcast. So if you're watching us live, you can jump over to that one. And today they are using Airtable without opening Airtable. So yesterday they did watch an app build itself. They've got a summary of it. You can watch it after the fact as well. So some good live demos going on with Airtable there.
Very cool.
Yep. Okay, so a few things to keep you up to date on. With that, Ali is going to talk about some new feature within automations inserting as JSON. What does that even mean for JSON? I've heard people say, "Who's this JSON guy?"
My old colleague, like counterpart at Gagel's, his name was Jason, and so whenever we'd talk about JSON, we'd be laughing about it because our conversations would get confusing. So okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Let me open this up. Amazing. All right.
There we go.
Perfect. So let me move you guys over to my other screen so I can still see you. Okay. So I'm going to use a use case of collecting feedback from people that attended an event. So I'm going to, we'll set up a fill out form, a very simple one, and it'll populate these two tables, submissions and scores. Let me make this a little bit smaller. This was possible to do before, but now it's a little bit easier and just it's going to be more reliable with this insert as JSON option. And I'll go through what it helps with and why it's useful, and what the problem was previously as well. So let's actually just start with a little bit of the schema. Super, super simple here. And I had to clean it up. I reworked it a little bit. We have events, we have people, and then we have submissions. So people are submitting scores about the event. And each one of these submission records is just like a holder. So it's like the holder of each of the scores that the person submitted. So I want to send out one form, but I want to collect on different lines. If I actually group this instead by submission. Clearly, did I do something wrong here? Interesting. Let me go back. Oh yeah, there is. Yeah, I only just have one. I had Claude generate fake data for this, so there's only one score. It looks like per. Regardless, I want to be able to have each line for each category be on its own line. So that way, when I have my dashboard, I can, filter it by type, by event, by submitted by, and still I can get an average across all of that accurately. And I won't have to be able to, I won't need to be able to like have separate fields. That's like average score ambiance, average score food, average score service. It's just easier to set it up this way for reporting purposes, and it just looks nicer, I think. So there's a lot of advantages to that, but let's talk about what this JSON is. So I'm going to open up automations and we'll get this started. My first thing here is I want to actually set up my trigger. And in my case, I'm going to use when webhook received. This is a little bit more of the setup beforehand, but I'm going to throw together this really quick fill out form, which I have pointed at my submissions table. And it's going to create a new record on my submissions table upon submission. So we're going to go edit. I'm just going to throw in the event submitted by, and then I'm going to actually throw in other fields. So the cool thing about fill out, this is kind of like a demo of other things you can do in fill out, which is I find super, super helpful. You can connect these fields to Airtable, right? So that's connected to my event field. I go to submissions, my event field here, and then my submitted by is this as well. I'm going to skip over the whole, privacy issue with the submitted by field being exposed. If I were doing this full build, I would actually, go through the means of hiding it and whatnot. But let's assume that everybody's okay with seeing everyone in this dropdown for now. I don't want to send out one individual form per score because that's annoying, and I don't want my users to be annoyed. So I'm going to send out one form, and I'm going to have 3 different questions on that form. Let's ignore the fact that this is not scalable. I'm going for looking nice over scalability, right? Because that's sometimes more important. And what I mean by that is if I ever add a new category, like say I want to start tracking a new category, I'm going to need to go back to this form and add a new field to it to start collecting that information as well. Kind of a negative piece, but unfortunately, if you use things like this choice matrix, the data it gives you back does not work. Like you just can't connect it dynamically to linked records, etc. So we're going to throw in any kind of field because we can just decide what we like here. So in our case, I have a rating. That's what I ultimately want to collect as a number from 1 to 10. So I'm going to throw in either maybe a slider. So you can choose what you like. Here you could say what the maximum is. So if that was 10, 89 out of 10. You could have this, and I could be like, please rate the ambiance. And then short answer. Let's actually just say ambiance rating, ambiance notes, just to keep the names all the same.
Yeah.
Oops. Yeah. And I think I did value, no service. And we'll do one more of these. Duplicate that. Okay. So let's publish this and just go straight to that. So obviously I could spend the time making this look nice. We're going to skip that part. But I'm going to choose an event. Interesting.
Live demos, everyone's favorite.
Yeah. Right? What's going on there? Okay. It is connected. Logic.
No filters.
Yeah.
Refresh. Wow.
What is going on? Maybe I'm not connected to the right.
It worked in your editor.
It did. I think so. That's strange. Let me just delete these fields, and I'm going to delete that integration. And the cool thing about fill out is so these fields are not connected to anything. They are just the forms fields. So I'm going to leave those there, and then I can actually add a new integration. I think what happened is I had two bases that were named event ratings in JSON. I had several bases named NPS example, I think. So, and they all happen to have events and submitted by as fields. So still submissions, continue, finish, publish now. Now I'm going to add back event. All right, now let's go refresh. And Airtable being slow. There we go. So let's say for the Gala, Maya says, great, loved it. And I'm going to skip service rating on purpose. And actually what I want to do here is go first into our integrate section and just talk about what that looks like. So right now, I only have event and submitted by mapped because those are the only two fields that I have connected to Airtable. I want to add in here the submission ID because ultimately what I want to do is be able to create that new record on my submissions table, and then I'm going to trigger a webhook to create all the score records that are linked to that submission. And in order to do that, I need the submission ID as part of that submission record to match them up correctly. So I'm going to do that in here, update, and I need to publish. This takes a second to show up, but there we go. And And that would create the record on my submissions table. If we go, and where's my form? So here's that new submission here. I don't have any scores linked to it yet. And this is Fillout's actual format of their submission ID. So now I need to go and actually send the data via the webhook. And this is where we get into our JSON piece. I'm going to actually go out of my integrations. So I'm back on this screen and I can add additional integrations in addition to my Airtable one. So in this case, I want webhook and in Airtable automations. I'm going to go make sure I have this copied. And I can paste it here. Now, if I just test that, it's not going to send anything because there are no values in my forms. So if I go look at what that just gave me here, there's just going to be like some things, but there's nothing really of use to me here. However, there will be when there's actual submissions. So I'm going to go back into here, and the easiest thing to do, ironically, I think, is to use the advanced tab. And in this, we can map the fields that we want. But actually, you know what? I'm just going to try it with this and just use the whole thing as JSON now, because we can do that now. And that might actually be more useful. So let's do that. So I'm going to just say finish setup here and publish. And then I'm actually just going to go refill this out again. Do a different one. Let's just leave a few blanks. Okay, so that should have given me more information. So here's my actual values from the submission. So previously, what is frustrating about this, about Airtable's scripting action in particular, is that if any of these values were empty, you had them mapped to something in the script, it would just error. Like there was no way around it. Like if it were empty, instead of just being a null value and being fine, it would just be like, sorry, we can't continue forward at all. And so that's what the benefit is of using the full thing as JSON. So if I open up this script, action here, let's just say JSON. And here I can say insert as JSON data, or I could, and this is what it was always before, is I could actually dive into this JSON tree here and say, okay, all of my submission data, I'm relying on the questions. Let's see. Value. There was like no way to get this out without being able to use the JSON data unless you mapped it. That's what there's a distinction with this fill out specifically is under the advanced tab. If you map it to the parameters that you want, then you can always rely on them being in the same place. But if they were empty, they still would cause a problem. So now I can actually just grab all of the questions. And in this case, I'm trying to think through how I want to do it. Let's see. I want to do that. I almost want to map them in fill out because it's better. It's better to map them in fill out ahead of time because I only need those questions, those answers. Yeah, I think I should do that. I'm just going to do it really quick, which is here. it would be like score ambiance, score food, score service, notes. And then I need the submission ID. I think that's really it. So ambiance rating, food rating, service rating, ambiance notes, food notes, and submission ID. That. Now if I submit,
But yeah, if you're using scripting, you could put the whole thing in there and then parse it in your script.
Yeah.
You can, yes, absolutely. It's just with fill out specifically, it can get like the way they have it. I find it easier to just pull out the ones that I want. And then what I'm still going to use the full JSON here because if I didn't,
there you go. Yeah, that's a much easier object to...
Exactly. Like now I'm only dealing with what I want, right? This is just the data I need to deal with. But I left note service empty on purpose so that we can see in here if I were to map this. To that, and just if I try and use that and then run it with a submission that's empty, it will not work. It would error.
I think it would still work because it's still in the post.
Yeah, the main problem is when you have missing keys or impermanent keys. So if note service wasn't part of the payload at all, not just null, just it wasn't included, that's a definite error. And then whether or not it errors and what you've done here, it kind of depends on what you do with it.
Well, well, even if there is maybe I'm not hitting the like exact place where it would error, but there is a place that like I'm not articulating correctly where.
Well, you're correct. Probably the find record step, because that hates null values. It has a very hard time of saying has any of null. For whatever reason, it freaks out instead of just saying returning nothing or returning anything. I would take either of those over an error, but that's just me.
Sometimes I'll have a webhook that comes from two different sources, and I might have like a mode value that specifies like where it came from, and the schema is maybe a little bit different, and I have to make sure both sources have all the same keys, even if they're not used, so that it doesn't error.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Exactly. So now I can take this and I could split it across those records. And
okay, now what's interesting is it actually comes in as an object. I was thinking it would come in as a string and you had to do JSON parse.
So for all other steps, it comes in as a string that is JSON formatted. But for the run script action, it does say insert as JSON data versus insert as JSON string. So it does tell you that it is going to come in as like a full object, which means whoever's sending you webhooks, make sure that they're formatted correctly, because if it's not proper JSON, this is going to fail.
Yeah. No, exactly. So yeah, now we would be able to then map that, and actually I wouldn't even need a script step for this because I could just the reason why I would use a script step for this is if I name everything appropriately, what I could actually do is like write a loop over all of these parameters, except for like take submission ID out, and then dynamically create however many sets of scores and notes I have. So that way I don't need to edit the script every time. I'm not going to spend the time doing that via this, just to leave time for Camille's demo as well. But the way that this inserts all of the data at once affords you further scalability without needing to like worry about it erroring if there's something empty, as long as you write your script the correct way.
And my least favorite part of the script action and automations is the putting in inputs. You only need one input.
Yeah.
Just give me the data from the webhook and I'll write my variable names myself, rather than this very fiddly one input per field that's coming from your form, which is harder to maintain.
Exactly.
Remember, this is the thing that Claude can't do yet. So while we're in this interim period where you can build automations except for scripts, make the script part easier on all of us. Just do one input and then parse it yourself inside the script. You're using a script anyway.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So instead of having to go through and do one of these for each one, I can just do this one with all the JSON. And then, like I said, like write some code to just, as long as I name all of my parameters the same in a trustworthy way, then I can never have to update the script and only update the form, which would be the way that I'd probably approach doing something like this. But the first thing you would actually do in this would be to find the submission ID record, so you can link them all up together.
Now, does it, this is a more fill-out question, is it sequential where it will create the record first and then call the webhook, or does it do like both at the same time, so it's possible the webhook got there before the create record?
Very good question. And I actually thought about that as I was setting it up today, because I've done this a million times. I believe it is sequential, that the create record is like, you can't drag them. But if it's set up to create a record, I believe that happens first. I actually don't know if they have that documented though.
And Allie, I'm less familiar with fill out, but I know they have workflows. So I can imagine a scenario where the form itself creates a record in Airtable, and then I'm imagining like you make a workflow that's like, well, when it's done doing that, then fire this webhook as like a potential. And then yet another way to do it technically, I guess, is if you have it so that it's still pulling data from Airtable, so you can get that drop down of events and people. But if it doesn't create the record at all, it only sends the webhook of what someone submitted. You can make the automation create the submission and then create. So you can force it to be sequential if fill out is not inherently sequential in that way.
100%. And what it also, I don't know about the workflow. I haven't tried workflows yet, but I got distracted by looking at something else. The order in which these happen, I've never actually had it misfire out of order. Like, I've never had the webhook go before the record is created. I wish they had it documented though. I don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't actually see it anywhere.
If, yeah, I bet that they are sequential, or like they both trigger at the same time, because I don't think you can use info from your create record in the webhook. Yeah, so that's more flow.
What's really cool though that you can do, you can get fancy with this. So you can put a few things. First, you can do a conditional filter on any integration here. So you can say only run this if one of the form answers is X or Y, whatever. Like, you can add conditions here, and they have condition groups, which is great. Then you can also, if you set this up to update a record, which I wouldn't for this use case, but in this case, they let you do, and I don't think this is not the right form plan level, but they have a prefetch feature. So if you are updating a record in a particular database, for example, and you need information that's in a different table or a different database, that's related, you can go fetch that information before the user even sees the page, which is really cool. And then you can use it in your everything else. What you can't do is get the ID of the record that was created. Like, that's something that I have often yearned for. That's why I'm using the submission ID here instead, to be able to match the scores, because otherwise, like, that's something that Airtable does. If you use a redirect from an Airtable form, you can use like squiggly record underscore ID squiggly to like use that as a placeholder for the ID of the record that the form created. You cannot do that in Fill Out, to my knowledge.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good example of both of Fill Out and the power of JSON. And that's a nice addition. You can also do it. Yeah, there's other places where you can insert as JSON, like you're mentioning, like as JSON string. So if you want to like update a record.
The one thing I'm curious about is the repeated action group in an automation can take any array. It doesn't have to be from a find record step, although that is the most common, I think, use case. Since JSON has arrays in it, I do wonder if the webhook, like, if you could never mind. I've talked myself out of it. You could already do that. It's not affected by the insert as JSON because it comes in already as an object from the trigger, which means if it's an array in the trigger, you can loop over that. So in this case, not all that relevant, but it is like just a reminder of it. Let's say your JSON wasn't formatted in the array that you want. You can plug it into the script very easily, map it however you need to get the array that you want, and then use that in additional steps afterward.
Right. That's kind of where I was headed with like the naming, like mapping this from an object into an array of those pairs for the score, notes.
Right.
Yeah, and that's how I wish it could be mapped when it came out of Fill Out. That's like where I was like, okay, if I had the matrix, but like something like that. But yeah, I digress. I could go on and on.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. We'll move on and get to double dip today on 2 new features. Now Camille is going to walk us through MCP automations. Your screen up. No. I'm not seeing your screen.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
no,
I was going to say, I've been having technical difficulties all morning.
Yeah.
So I just had, I just went into Airtable, picked one of their existing templates, and it came in with one automation. This is the second time I've talked about this in a base that has one automation. But what I'm about to go through is what you can do with automations and AI. Again, I use Claude personally. You could do this with Gemini or whatever other model you want, as long as you're connecting to Airtable's native MCP. And I'm going to demo how it can pull information out of your existing automations, update an existing automation, and create new ones. So starting off with what is the use case that this came in with? It's resource allocation. So one of the things that I might steal eventually from Airtable's templates is the idea of having this page of these are the features of the app that you're on. So if you needed to know, like, how do I schedule things, it comes with like a nice dashboard, not a dashboard, a gallery kind of overview of those things. But this is what it is included. Generally, person by person utilization over a timeline, being able to track time off and who's working on what and when. That's what is involved with this template. And I didn't modify anything else. This is the template presented as is. If I go back and look at my one automation, it's really just a status update notification. So whenever status is updated, it's supposed to email somebody that the action, whatever like project that was, just updated its status. And the way that this template was configured, it doesn't know who to email, right? So the to option is blank. So that feels like a good opportunity to ask Claude to go in and make that update of fill in the to be filled with whomever this is actually supposed to go to. In a real world use case, it could go several different ways. I have seen project and resource allocation implementations where you might have watchers for a project. So not the person who's assigned to do it, but people who are invested in the outcome. So you might say, pull in a value from a watcher field, and that's who it should go to. But there also might be a static list of stakeholders as well. So you might be able to just type in directly what their emails are. That kind of goes into use case specific decisions that you would make. But this isn't real. So I'm going to say, and then before I did this, I've connected Airtable, the MCP, to Claude using the native connector. So with that in mind, I'm going to say in the resource allocation base, please update the notification email to send to 5 fake email addresses. So I'm going to see how that does. Can you tell me about more? Now, I did not reference that I'm talking about Airtable, so I'm going to say Airtable. Yeah, I wanted to use placeholder emails. Again, this is not real.
All right.
So, depending on your implementation, you might have set the Airtable connector to ask you before going forward with any of these specific actions. I'm going to, for the purposes of this demo, just keep saying allow once. But depending on who you are and what you're doing, you might have said, just do it. If I told you to do it, do it. I am a little bit more cautious, generally speaking. So you're going to see me clicking allow once over and over again, or until I get annoyed.
Yeah. Getting annoyed.
Because it keeps asking. So now I'm going to be reading out the explanation as I go. Now I'll update the automation send email node to add 5 placeholder test emails, preserving the existing subject message context. Great, because I didn't tell you to update those. It says done. So let's go back and look. And would you look at that? It was truthful. Isn't that great when AI doesn't lie to you? So very simple example. In a real world, you would have known what emails to insert, but it can update an existing thing within automations. Now, this is different from interacting with interfaces, where I found that it vastly prefers, or perhaps is only capable of, creating new pages versus editing existing. In automations, it is very capable at updating stuff that is already there. It didn't have to delete this send email action and replace it with a new one. It updated the one that was already there. And I'm going to be going through what it can and can't do. So generally speaking, when you create a new automation via the MCP, it's going to come in as off. It does have the ability to delete an automation, but just like if you were to do it directly in the UI, it can't do it if the automation is already on. I'm pretty sure it can turn an automation off, but these are the things that I'm going to be testing. So I'm going to say, looks good, turn the automation on, because I don't remember if it can do that. So this is a test for me to see if it actually has that ability. Cool. So it can't actually turn it on. So depending on how careful you are, if you're cautious like me, this is a good thing, because I kind of want that level of control to say a human has to go in and say, turn this on. I'm going to turn it back off, but I will say I don't need it anymore. Delete that automation. So because it asked, it obviously can delete an automation. I'm going to look and say, oh, wow, it's gone. Great. Actually, I'm very fickle today. I changed my mind. Undo that. So this is what, and we talked about this before when we sort of breezed over all of the MCP improvements. Revert is the same thing as undo. One of my favorite additions to the MCP because it's not going in to the trash and pulling it out of the trash. That's not a tool. It is undoing a specific action. So behind the scenes, every time it's making a call against Airtable, it's tracking the action ID, I think is what it's called. So when you ask it to undo something, it knows exactly which action you're talking about, assuming that you did it from Claude. So it has access to what that action ID is. So it can say, I'm going to take everything related to that action ID and revert it. So I'm going to say allow once. It says it's undone. And would you look at that? Hey, it's back. So very high level example. It can't turn on an automation, but it can update an existing one. It can delete an automation that is off, and it can undo any of those 4 things. So now I'm going to say I need a new notification email similar to the first, but scheduled every Monday morning at 10 a.m. The email should summarize tasks and be sent to all, the same emails in the first automation, something like that. So I'm asking it to create a new automation. This is my next series of tests. It's going to have a different trigger because I asked it to be scheduled versus when a record is updated. So it's probably going to do some thinking, and it's likely going to ask me several times to allow it to do something. So I'm going to be ready to do that. But what I found is that basically all of the Airtable triggers, except for webhook, it's really good at setting those up. The other triggers I haven't tested. So if you read the documentation, Airtable says it mostly works with the other ones, but that doesn't really tell me anything. That's probably more in-depth investigation that I'd probably have to do to really know what it can't do. For the Airtable based triggers and actions, I have a relatively good handle of what it can and can't do. The biggest one, obviously, we've already mentioned it, is that it can't touch scripted actions. They did say that that's on its way. So it says that it has completed, which is a nice summary. So this is kind of helpful information, I guess, for people who aren't aware. I'm going to go and look at that actual automation. So Airtable, when you select the time in an automation, and it does say this up here, it's your local time zone. So Airtable knows that I'm in Pacific. That's my time zone. That's what the 10 a.m. is referencing, and that's what Claude is trying to explain to me. So basically, this is its summary of what it attempted to do, and I'm going to go and review it. So Monday at 10 a.m., that's what I said to do. Get all tasks, great. This is the same email addresses, great. And then here's your weekly task summary with the list of records. So this is great because it does show that it's able to pull a very action-specific parameter that you can pull. The list of records, right, isn't available on every single action that's available within Airtable. It's not specific to, but it's mostly associated with the find record step. It was able to insert that. So I'm just going to look really quickly to see what it included, everything, because I didn't really give it any instructions. So now I'm going to test that a little bit and say, let's say I want the task, the status, and the assignee as the only fields visible. So update the email list to only show the task, the assignee, and status. And again, I'm expecting it to ask me to do this.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else.
I'm not sure if we'll have time, but I have tested it with conditional groups and repeated actions. It was able to do that just fine. But that does kind of get to the MCP and whatever tool you're using. Again, I'm using Claude, are only as good as what your prompt is. So the more specific you are, the better it's going to be at doing some of those more advanced things like nested logic. You got to be real upfront about what you actually want. Otherwise, it's going to start guessing and it might guess wrong. So I'm going to edit this token. And would you look at that? Task assignee and status.
That's cool because at the data layer, you can't get nitty gritty with like configuration of formatting fields. So that's cool. They've gone that level with automations.
Yeah, and this is really annoying to update, just generally speaking. So, like, I can see a world where you would have, I develop skills for things that I have to do repeatedly with AI, and I might say as part of my skill, these are my core fields that I care about, and by default include these core fields and nothing else. And if you add that as part of your workflow, then the MCP would have been told up front, just include these 3 fields because that's part of the general instructions that I would have given Claude, versus me having to go back and make that clarification. But that kind of gets more into how do you use AI efficiently in your day-to-day and less to do with Airtable specifically. So, in my original overview of this, I was basically like, I really have no notes other than I'm patiently waiting for the run a script action. It's pretty good. There's a couple of things that it can't really do, like if you need it to run a test, I don't think it can run tests. I think if you turn the automation on and then tell AI to force that trigger, I can't force time to pass, so this isn't a good example. But I could tell it to update the status of a record, and it would trigger this automation. I can't tell it to do this thing, the test portion. This is contrary kind of to in forms. You can tell the MCP to submit a form, which is very cool, but we don't have time for that.
Yeah, that's cool. You can see if everything in Airtable was like configurable through the MCP like that opens up the platform significantly. So this is a huge step in that direction. We'll see if it continues down this path, what the new owners will do with it.
The last thing I'm doing is the same thing I did previously in an earlier episode of just saying, give me all of the basis automations as JSON. It's going to think a little bit about that before it outputs as soon as I give it permission. So here we are. So this is going to come in as an array, and again, the find record step is going to be in there. It's going to include what the filter is, but the filter notation is going to take time for me to learn. otherwise, you can see with the first automation, because it is so simple, it's really just sort of sending that email. You can see most of the information that you would need to pull at a glance: the name, the description. It can update descriptions as it goes. Undeployed means it's off. And then I do like that it says configuration status valid versus, I'm assuming, invalid, because every now and again I could see if your job is to maintain Airtable bases, right, you might want to have a weekly report of, give me all of the automations in my bases that have something wrong with them. And that could be something like, if your trigger is when the status field is updated and then you delete the status field, it's going to be like, well, there's something wrong with this automation. That's an example. Yeah, things like that would cause that to say not valid, but invalid. And then if you're curious about how it stores time, this is how. So I chose Monday as the day. Monday is 1, Sunday is 0. And then these are in the 24-hour clock.
Okay, I've got a question.
I don't know what width is, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, wait. If you go back to your automation and you turn it on,
Yep.
and then you make a change to it, but you don't click the update button,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what version it gives you through the MCP. Does it give you the published version or the unpublished state?
Maybe it gives a intermediary state of pending update. I found a pretty awesome JSON viewer that was free the other day that I've been using a lot, called Dadroit.
Dadroit? Yeah. I use onlinejsoneditor.org.
All right, cool.
I use that a bunch.
Yeah, there's obviously this is great to see if you have 2 automations like I do. If you have more, this is going to be real annoying to look at. So having a JSON viewer is pretty important. So I don't know. It was able to know which one. I didn't tell it which one I changed. So I think it. Hold on. How?
So let's see. There it has test 4, so it doesn't have the.
Oh wait. I think this might. I don't know if this is the exact output out of the API call behind the scenes of like get automations, or if this is Claude adding to the output for my benefit because I asked it. But like this 2 array, that's not up here if I were to look within the body of this automation. So I am curious, but it does say deployed version versus draft. So at the very least, it is useful in that as separate objects, you have the ability to compare and contrast, because we're run out of time now. But I could then go say, what is the difference between draft and deployed? Summarize that for me, because I don't want to read through this, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, so it gives you both.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, okay, so those are not unique. Or is it within the same automation object, or does it count as like 2 automations?
It's within the same automation. So yeah.
Key.
Yes. Gotcha. Draft is a key or parameter of the first automation in this array. So, and then if I keep scrolling down, this is where a JSON viewer would be helpful. Deploy version is another key in that. And then we've talked about this before. Trigger is separate from nodes. So nodes is the individual steps within the automation. In this case, there's only one step. The trigger is always its own separate object.
Yeah. Gotcha. Very cool. Okay, so yeah, anything that has a draft, a modified version as a draft would show up within that node.
Yeah, my next series of tests would be I'm going to mess an automation up on purpose and then see how the errors come in through reviewing what the JSON is, and just say, summarize for me what's wrong with this automation. Because imagine if this were a longer automation that did a lot of things and one field is used all over the place. Just tell me all the places I need to update.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're up on time, but this is very useful, very powerful way. I'm going to start using this instead of the manual process of creating automations as much as possible, and can't wait for the full build out of scripts.
At the very least, it is very good at documenting each step. Like the automation it created came in with a description, something I never do. So that's what I'm using it for.
Yep. Very cool. Thank you. Thank you, Ali and Camille, for those deep dives. And we'll be back next week with another deep dive episode. Everybody